Let's take an in-focus look at the maximal inhalation, or the full lung position, which I can also breath hold in, which outlines 5 different phases starting from a -1 completely exhaled diaphragmatic point, filling through the abdominal area into the chest and finishing off with a clavicular inhalation which fills the tips of the lungs. This particular sequence is very useful as well for diagnosing and working over any patterning or physiological restrictions which might exist, for example, in activation of the diaphragm and also around the rib cage area too. One of the perspectives of this full inhalation is that it works sequentially. And whilst when we actually perform the full lung inhalation, whether that's just for extended breathing practices, taking a long breath in and extended exhalation as well, or whether I'm filling the lungs to perform a maximal breath hold, ultimately when we do apply that in context, it's going to be very, very seamless. It will just be a single inhalation. However, we can pull the inhalation apart, outline specific phases of it and work on them individually. So the first thing that we have to establish is a diaphragmatic 0 point. That's essentially when I'm completely relaxed and there's no tension being held in the abdominal or the diaphragm area. This is going to be achieved quite nicely if we work with a wave breath, which essentially means I first of all fill the abdominals, the abdominal area with air. I take an inhalation, I feel it naturally wave up to the head top. I hold very relaxed for a moment and then I release and the air passively leaves the lungs. So as an example, I start with filling through the abdominal area. There's a natural wave to the head top. I hold for a moment nice and relaxed, and as I release, with a natural sigh, I'm in this place where I kind of hang between worlds in the twilight zone. The diaphragm is completely relaxed and the air is expelled passively through the mouth or through the nose, rather than an active exhalation in which I would normally contract around the abdominal area to expel the air. Now from this 0 point, we're now going to locate our -1 point, which is a maximal exhalation. This is either performed normally when we blow out our birthday candles once a year, or if you're in a stress situation and you really need to scream, so it's something that might not be so familiar. But we can go from our 0 point and then continue the exhale. Until I'm unable to exhale any further. Something that can be very useful to elicit this is a visualization. One can be a visualization using the hand as a fist. As I close the fist, it's as if I visualize the air being squeezed out of me. And mechanically, we can also think about pulling the navel in towards the spine. And this helps to facilitate a maximal exhale. Now, when I'm in this -1 position, this is the first position. So the next point is going to be when I release the tension and then the air passively fills the lungs. And this is the first of the 5 phases of the maximal inhalation. So from my -1, I release. And I'm back to this relaxed position again. Air has passively entered the lungs, and I could actually quite comfortably hold here and perform a breath hold at this 0 point. However, we have 4 more levels of the inhalation to consider. So the next inhalation is going to be, again, diaphragmatic, and it's going to follow on from the visualization of the fist. I'm now going to feel myself opening through the hand as the navel is pushed outwards towards the spine. So I've come from a -1, now released a passive 0 point. I keep inhaling and I push outwards towards the spine. And it's quite a small range if we observe it here, the difference between passive and then the +1 diaphragmatic region. As we can see, no movement coming from the chest or clavicular region, as they're not yet coming into the phases of the full inhalation. Now, we can also practice specifically in these regions before we put them together, just to ensure that they're nicely mapped in terms of patterning, and also it helps to give a nice stimulus to the diaphragm through kind of stretching, and also the abdominal and respiratory musculature that's involved in there as well. So as an example, I can just practice exhales to -1, releasing, and finding that relaxed 0 point with minimal residual tension around the abdominal area. And I can go again, and release. Passive inhalation, again remembering that I want to avoid actively inhaling. Exhale, release. And now the same for 0 to +1 diaphragmatic position. From 0, and it's also even possible that we can work this now into combination breathing, where I move from one directly into the other. So from diaphragmatic 0 point to -1 to 0 to +1 and back to 0. Breathing out, -1, release, 0 point, +1, release back to 0. So now we have the first two phases. The next phase of the inhalation is going to be the ribcage breathing, in which we want to expand the ribcage outwards. If there is hypertonicity a lot around the intercostals and the ribcage area, this can be quite challenging, but at the same time it can provide a very nice kind of intrinsic stretch from the lungs being pressed outwards. This is probably one of the more difficult ones because what we can find ourselves tending to do after we inhale through the abdominals is going directly to the chest. So for example, and then I go to the chest. However, the lungs can expand very wide, and in this case, when I'm not paying attention and I miss out, or if I don't have it on my inhalation map, so to speak, I can miss out the capacity which is available for this lateral spreading of the ribs. So a very nice way that we can work this and see it happening in front of us is by placing the thumbs on the side of the ribs, just above the floating ribs, and more around the middle of the rib cage. A nice place to take is around about where we have the solar plexus, and then following it out to the outside of the ribs from here. Now in a relaxed 0 point position, this is where I'm going to start. And as I inhale, I want to spread the touching forefingers apart. So as I inhale here, I inhale, and I can even hold for a few moments. Still actively inhaling, and then releasing. And we can notice that the abdominal breath is actually absent in this breathing pattern. Despite the inhalation, there's no expansion of the abdominal region. We can work this pattern for repetitions, and then we can combine it with the other breathing ranges. So from -1, release the passive, abdominal inhalation to +1, and then spreading. And now we've filled the abdominal region, and we've lifted that higher up through the lungs. And then there's another fourth region of the inhalation, which is going to be more familiar and more natural for most, which is the chest inhalation. And essentially, we're just bringing the air up into the chest and filling the lungs as much as possible, so we feel like we have this big full barrel position. If we were going to isolate this in and of itself, we can place the hands on the chest here and just feel the chest rising as we inhale. If necessary, we can also emphasize with an actual lifting of the chest at the same time, as long as we're not bringing too much tension into the structure. And again, I can inhale and keep actively inhaling whilst not being able to bring any more air into the lungs, just to emphasize the stretch in that position. I'm still trying to inhale, and then I release. So this is for what concerns the fourth range of the full breath. The last range is going to be clavicular, and this will be an active lifting of the shoulders with the idea of filling the tips of the lungs at the very top. So preceding that with the full inhalation from the previous 4 levels, I expel fully. -1, first inhalation. Second. Third, ribs. Fourth, chest. Fifth, just a short lifting to fill the tips of the lungs, and I release with control. Back to my 0 point. So this would be the 4 phases of the full lung inhalation. Just to recap, each of these is an area of practice to itself, and it can help to map the full ranges of the maximal inhalation in terms of patterning, and also physiologically. As an example, if there's some restriction around the ribcage, you may find, as an example, with the ribcage breathing, when I'm trying to separate these fingers, I'm breathing, but they're not really pulling apart. So this is something that can be plugged out for practice and brought back into the maximal full lung inhalation. When it's performed seamlessly for a breath hold, then it would look like this. So starting again with the full exhalation. Holding, relaxed, and controlled release. Finding myself back to the 0 point. One thing to notice is that, of course, when we release the air, we are not going through those phases of the exhalation. Likewise, when I inhale, I'm not necessarily taking it step by step. This is a little bit too mechanical for the natural inhalation, but what I want to eventually develop is a seamless full lung exhale which mobilizes and makes use of the full capacity of the breathing ranges available, so that I can have an effective full lung inhalation.